Ladies and gentlemen, welcome, blah, 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 blah. Boy, it has been a while, hasn't it?
A little bit.
That was not an intentional stumble. That was just a fumble straight out the gate. Welcome to the Chips and Bits podcast. I'm your host, Kenny Myers, and with me for the foreseeable future is...
Matthew Anderson.
And we are back from sabbatical to give you half a year of podcasts for your enjoyment on this, the most important day in the world, the 4th of July. Matt, how are you?
I'm great. Sabbatical was good. Happy to be back talking about video games. How are you doing?
Yeah. What did you do on your sabbatical, since we only exist in this digital realm?
I went to visit Boise, Idaho, and then I liked it. And then I went home to Seattle and I packed up my apartment and I moved to Boise, Idaho. And then I quit my job. So that's what I did on my sabbatical.
Yep, that's right. Matt is just failing at everything. So these are the results. He moved to a lesser city in a lesser state and he lost his job. Anyway, pretty soon we'll be putting up what's the donation site for him?
GoFundMe.
A GoFundMe for him to help him better his life back to where it was. Me, however, I spent a lot of time playing very long JRPGs and other very long games because Matt doesn't play those, and it was great, and it reminded me why I love video games, and here I am now podcasting with Matt.
Yay!
So, the Chips and Bits podcast is back. Oh, yeah, I should hit the theme, huh? The Chips and Bits podcast is back. Chips. Oh
no! Ugh, that's twice.
Well, what can I say? It's that kind of day. I just really wanted everyone to hear that splash once again. Today is not only the return of the Chips and Bits podcast, but it is
a day we thought would never come.
A day that I thought for the life of me would never happen. Eventually, though, even though he didn't pay any money for it, I got Matt to play a From Software game, and he finished it as per our agreement. And that game is Sekiro, the wolf, if you will.
That's one other thing that I did on sabbatical, Kenny. I played Sekiro.
He did play Sekiro. I think that was like the only game you played. What was the other game you played?
Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Yeah, we did play a lot more Overwatch again. Like
we did.
Like the moody bitches we are.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, but he fulfilled a promise to me with combat that he wasn't 100% disgusted with because he has no taste. And he has completed Sekiro. And now we're going to talk about one of my favorite From Software titles for a lot of reasons. But I just think about Sekiro. So, Matt, I guess first question, cards on the table. Did you enjoy Sekiro?
I did.
Did you love Sekiro?
I think so. I was very close to loving it.
I am holding back tears.
It's. I think the best way to describe it is that it does feel like, unlike some other games I played, I definitely have a relationship with Sekiro now. So, that's where sort of like the love angle comes in. I will say, like, when I started playing it was grindy in the beginning. You have to kind of grind through some stuff. You have to learn the game. I expected it to be somewhat tedious and very difficult. And the learning curve, it's funny, unlike the other From games I've played, the learning curve is a lot less steep in the very beginning as far as like getting the basic combat, and then the moving around is much more fun, much more action, based with the zip line mechanic and whatnot. So it is a little bit faster to start, but then there's a pretty big valley especially once you start hitting the first bosses, where
Yeah.
you get punched in the face over and over again because you're just not good enough at the game yet. Um, and whether I think the most difficult thing for me to parse is whether or not, had I not made the promise to you, would I have made it through that grindy part in the beginning? And I think the answer is yes. I think the world, I think the combat, I think the pacing of the game was more than good enough in the beginning that had I just played it on my own, I would have continued. And I'm glad that I did because in the end, yeah, boy, it's just a great game, top to bottom. By the time you finish it, as long as you could put your paces through it and be patient. Yeah,
I
it's
mean, based on like the progress we heard, you actually were better than most of us at playing that game for the first time. Like for how long it took you to beat the last boss versus how long it took Andrew, my brother, who we played it at the same time. So I'm linked with him on this. Just the last boss, and most people I know take a lot of turns, and I think it took you like 3 or 4.
No, not the last one. I mean, like the last. Well, I mean the third to last took me. I think that was the weird one. It took me like
Yeah,
2 or 3 tries,
yeah,
and then I was like, "Yeah, I beat him." And you're like, "What?" Um, but then there's the fire demon.
hmm
That fire demon took me, I don't know, 45 tries
But I mean
over.
that like, well, I want to get to the fire demon later. Let's talk about because I want to talk about uh one of the things like in the Ghost of Tsushima podcast, they talked about loving the sword play and like loving the sword play. And after I had played Sekiro and I loved Sekiro, the sword play on Tsushima felt like a cruel joke. Like it felt like it felt like the kiddie version. Like it just didn't have the tightness or the like responsiveness expected of Sekiro. And Sekiro you can like tune it so that it gets even harder, so you have to be more precise. And I was wondering, I asked you if you did you get a chance to play Tsushima a little bit with the sword?
Yes, I did my homework.
Oh, you did your homework. And what do you think?
Yeah. Well, I can tell you for certain that the very first thing I found myself, well, so first I had to relook up the controls because
Right.
I didn't want to start at the beginning because there's a long prologue. So I jumped into my New Game Plus somewhere in the middle of like a Mongol base or something
Yeah.
and had to look up the controls really quick. And I was like, okay, block. Yeah, got it. And the very first thing I did was multi-tap L1 to block just repeatedly, which doesn't work in Tsushima. It wants
Yeah.
you to time a single parry instead of your like weird trigger finger from Sekiro. So I did that and messed up quite a bit and died very quickly.
Yeah.
And then I played it for about an hour and I finally got back into the flow of the combat. And I think for me they're just different. I Sekiro is a much like the game is much more how do I word it? Like the combat and the battle system is much more woven into the game. It almost feels like they're sort of like one and you can't separate them.
Right.
Where in Tsushima you could plug in almost any other combat system that was good, and it would work because the game is sort of like its own thing.
Yeah.
Um, I would say that like Tsushima, yeah, it's not about finesse as much as I thought it was the first time I played it.
Yeah.
Because man, if you just mash the attack button, you can
Yeah.
break through so much of the enemy's guard. But you also one of the things you can do in Tsushima, which you can't do as well in Sekiro, is you can fight an entire crowd of guys. Like you can
Right.
fight 12 guys at once in Tsushima, and it can be action packed, and you can flow through all of them and mix all these moves together and just dismantle 12 enemies.
Yeah.
Man, if you were surrounded by 12 enemies in Sekiro, you're dead. Like
Yeah.
pretty much that's how that goes. You don't ever want to be surrounded by more than one, ideally, but like 2 or 3 is enough. So that was basically my thought. It definitely didn't have the finesse that I thought it did. It still seemed fun and fluid, but I would just define it as more of like an action style combat system, and
Yeah.
Sekiro is much more of like an actual combat system, which
Yeah.
I guess I hadn't honestly experienced prior to that.
Yeah. I think it's funny you bring up. I thought the way you described the tale of Sekiro is really, really one of the things I think that differentiates it from a lot of other. There are many things. I mean, if I were to say like Sekiro is unique in the From Software, the people who make Dark Souls, Demon Souls, and now the very successful Elden Ring and Bloodborne. And then this game is like very unique in that pantheon. But you described one of the reasons I love it so much, which is that in Dark Souls, eventually you can just get so powerful that you can just mow through people. Like you can just get like you could just look up a guide to figure out how to become incredibly powerful quickly. There's still challenge, there always is. Like bosses will still be hard, but like you could just like it's an RPG in that sense. In Sekiro, no matter what, you have to constantly increase your skill with all the things you are given, and it doesn't taper off. Uh, the last boss fight is considered one of From's hardest bosses, but every From game is actually generally always divided into 3 chapters. And at the end of the Sekiro chapters, they're not officially marked as chapters, but you kind of know where they are. You always end up on this rooftop fight with like a level of bad guy that's just like, are you sure you're ready to go forward? Like, I don't know if that's, um, I don't know if that's, if you're really ready to go forward. And like the first one you encounter is, I think it's Genichiro, uh, if I'm not mistaken, the lightning. Yeah. Uh, and his first of all, most of the fights in those games are 2 levels. Like most of the bosses are like 1, 2 levels, and they have a really cool system where you do this like ultimate attack and blood flies everywhere. Um, but that's like the first 3 level boss fight, and the third round is so different from the other 2 rounds. It's like a whole different scheme, but it still fits naturally into the boss fight. Um, and then once you beat that boss, you're actually fighting a whole new layer of bosses. And in my opinion, with one exception, like the middle part of Sekiro has one of in my favorite boss in FromSoft's series, which is the poop throwing monkey.
Oh yeah, I love the monkey.
The monkey is so challenging. It's such a hard boss fight. And it's so funny when you come back to it after having played the game. Like if you've gone through it again, like a new game or new game plus, for example, how much easier it is. Like all these fights are easier. Um, but it's just one of the most creative. I'm going to spoil things a little bit here. It's just, it has 2 phases, and they're 2 different style of phases. But he's very challenging because he's one of the quickest bosses. Like he just moves so quickly, and he's so big, and he can cover so much ground that you have to essentially just constantly be knowing when to block, knowing when to attack, like knowing when to run away from him as fast as possible. And the music is really good. And then it looks like you kill him by chopping off his head. And in what must be one of the best sequences in video games, his body rises up and moves completely differently, which you find out
And
later
there's
is
such a delay. I mean, it's just the timing of you feeling so
good.
heroic
Yeah.
after finally
A
defeating this game,
brutal
like,
fight.
oh, and I was streaming like another one of the things that like this
We
is,
made Matt stream it. I made Matt stream it, and you didn't know this, but I sent messages to everyone, which got them to show up. That I was like, he's about to fight the monkey, and he hasn't gotten to phase 2 yet. And then like 5 people show up watching you stream it because we all know what's
it
going to
was the first
happen.
time I ever really enjoyed streaming because like one of the problems I have with streaming is that I don't talk as much as most people do when I play video games. Like I get very focused, and this game is absolute. It's an even worse exception where I had to be lightning focused
Yeah,
to do any of these bosses. And yeah, it makes you feel like I finally did it with a crowd watching me, and I was like, yeah, like I'm yelling for joy, like I'm so excited that I finally did this, and I'm talking and I'm getting distracted, and then his dead corpse stands up, and it was like, oh, for fuck's sake, like I can't believe I'm not done yet.
we were all so happy at that point. It was just so funny. But I think like that part of the boss fight is actually pretty easy. Fortunately, like once you learn how to deflect, which I think you picked up pretty quickly. I think it only took like 2 or 3 tries to do it. Um, but this is one thing I love about this game is that once you learn that fight, From will always try to do something that incorporates that fight and then makes you also try to level up. Like, and generally, like there are a lot of repeat fights in this game with characters that, even though you've seen their designs before, like they just add something new enough to them that is just so interesting. Um, I mean, the boss design is excellent in Sekiro. All the bosses, with the exception of the monkeys, which I think you liked. There's like a weird monkey puzzle one that's kind of
Oh,
funny.
the invisible ones.
Yeah, it's just kind of silly. Like they always have weird, silly bosses. But like when you're playing through the game, you eventually get to a point where you go into this cavern and then the monkey appears again that you just fought in worm mode. And then like halfway through their health bar, of which there's only one, another monkey appears. And the monkeys are now the two different move sets because the first one's controlled by a worm, you find out, and the second one is like a full monkey, like doing the same move sets at the same time. That was so upsetting before. But when you conquer that, and it's actually much easier than the first time you played through it, like that's what makes From games so phenomenal. And I think you captured that with the idea of streaming. Like they feel like achievements, but they don't feel like cheap like achievements. They feel like they were earned properly. Like
Yeah, not at all. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, yeah, you covered so much ground there, but I agree. I feel like I didn't feel overpowered in this game until I beat the game and then started playing New Game Plus, and then you just walk through the level and you just mow people over. And it's like, this game's easy now. So yeah, pacing wise and leveling, um, one of the things I really loved about this game was that it forced you not just skill wise and level wise to sort of explore and learn the map organically and where the bosses were, so that you would, because you needed to know when you were ready to fight a boss. Furthermore, after the first couple of times you spend a skill point on a skill that doesn't benefit you for a boss, you only make that mistake one time, and then you're like, okay, I need to go around, find out which bosses are which, and then decide which one I think I can beat, so that I can spend my skill point on the most natural upgrade that I know will help me with this boss.
yeah.
So I love that aspect of it. And then I think the other thing that contributed to is the thing that you and I harp on a lot when it comes to um, any game where there's a leveling and an upgrade tree, in the sense that sometimes they just it's all flash, right? And there's a lot of cool stuff, but it's overwhelming, and then you end up coming up with some sort of kit that you use all the time anyways. And then
Mm-hmm.
you never really explore all those other skills, and it kind of feels like, man, that was a lot of effort and I don't really care
Yeah.
about those skills. And this is the exact opposite. I mean, you are always utilizing absolutely every aspect of the skill tree at all times, and most of the time you're exhausting it. So like you're constantly running up against a wall where you just don't have the skill set to compete in the game, and you need to go get it. So it always just feels like you have the bare minimum toolbox to get one step further, and then you're like, oh, thank God, I better go get some more tools. And that's kind of like the motto of the game.
I think that like that's actually a pattern. He's not Matt has not played any other From Software games. That's a
All
pattern
the way through.
in their games that is really I think you touched on really well. When you play those games, like you can play all those games without doing anything. People have beaten them without even leveling up. Like naked, no armor, no nothing, like their basic starter weapon. They just go through, they upgrade what they need, and then they do. In Sekiro, it's actually really interesting because you have these skills, you're limited in which skills you can do, and there's like skill trees, but they're different skill books. So, like, you can only do one certain tree if you want to get something. And so what Matt did, which I didn't really do on my playthrough, but is one of like the ethos of From Software, is like within their systems, they reward different things really, really well. So like in a Horizon game, like yeah, you can go down the attack tree or like one tree, like and just stick to one mode of play and get it done. But the thing is, when you face a boss in Sekiro and you've learned a specific like weapon tree, like the advantage you get is so significant compared to if you didn't. That exploration of that, and then you start combining them, like is really just so well thought out. Like, do you after beating it, I mean, you're not a From Software obsessive. You don't want to play the other games, but like, do you maybe have a little bit more of an understanding of why people talk about their game design, how they think about games? Do you think that was anyway informed by this?
Well, it had to be at least slightly. My always my major gripe with the From games were how the combat system felt, um, in the sense that like the commitment to realism for me diminished my enjoyment of like actually sitting down and playing the game. I don't. I know I have a heavy axe. I don't want it to take 3 seconds for me to swing it, right? That sort of thing.
Yeah.
And so the fact that Sekiro, as part of its differentiating factor, sort of normalized all of that, so that once you got to know all of your weapons and you constantly could switch between them, and you just got used to the fluidity of movement and actually the parrying mechanic, it felt more like an action game. And the fidelity, I guess, of tapping the button and action happening felt more instantaneous, and that, to me, that was more rewarding. So it certainly put me in a place where, since I got to experience all of like a game's entire tree of bosses, and how they unlock different levels and the backtracking mechanics and the movement and the world, I just it certainly made me feel like, gosh, I wish, well, I hope that they make more games that have some differentiating sauce like Sekiro, or just more Sekiro style games,
Yeah.
with a more fast paced, sort of like um, instantaneous trigger happy combat system for someone like me, because I certainly enjoyed everything else, and I think I would probably have enjoyed it, in all the other games. What I've played of Elden Ring so far feels the same way, where I'm just like, I wish that this was a little less clunky feeling, because I want to go and explore the world. It's so penalizing to me from like a combat system standpoint.
Yeah, but it's what's so interesting is that that's a lot about weapon choice in those games.
Yeah,
I mean, but the mechanic, I mean, no combat feels as tight in any game I've ever played as Sekiro. Like, the blocking is so precise and it's so satisfying. Like, this game, so I mean, review, like, I've always loved this game. I've loved it for years. I think I even brought it up like several times. Um, I actually destroyed an Xbox, my Xbox Elite controller on this game. I think I told,
the L1
yeah,
button.
the
Yeah,
L1
that's
button.
not surprising.
Actually, the triggers on it were this, like, comparatively, like, the weakest non-replaceable part on it. And the L1 I hit so much because it's your block and you're using it constantly in this game. It's essentially like a rhythm game, the way you use L1 in this, that it actually broke my controller and I could no longer use it. And I had to like use another Xbox controller because of this game. And it wasn't an anger thing either. I wasn't like aggressively. It was just like you're so precise, so you're constantly like trying to get the timing right. Um,
I mean, it
it's
was part of the learning mechanic for me too. In the first time you fight a bot, which we haven't really talked about this either yet. And then, again, this is one of the things that I felt was so good about this game, the combat system and the bosses kind of all tied together, is that all other games, as you learn how to play and as you progress through bosses, most of the time the bosses are just, if they're a test at all, they're a test of if you've mastered your own skills yet.
Yeah,
You got a new power? Cool. Do you know exactly how to use it? If so, this boss is going to test you, and it does that. Sekiro does that for sure, but to Kenny's earlier point, it also tries to test any like passive or secondary skills that you may have developed slowly from just like secondary characters and leveling mechanics. They all have different abilities. They all have different pace of fighting. Some of them are very slow. Some of them are super fast. Um, and so part of that learning mechanic when you first encounter a boss is you don't know when they're going to be striking with a a parryable move, or whether you need to get out of the way. And so at first you just sort of like, since you don't know exactly when to block to do a perfect parry, you just kind of like repeatedly tap the block over and over again until
yeah,
you learn exactly what the pace of the boss's um, fighting style is, and then you'll sort of like learn and stop tapping it as much and only start striking it to do perfect blocks. But yeah, I had an achy finger the first couple of nights I played.
yeah. I should have asked you to record, like, just put a microphone right by your finger, versus like the end battle, because it's true. Like, now when I play Sekiro, even having gone through their other games, which also involve like price surprise, like a timing a mechanism. Like, one of the things they always do is the your actions queue up, which causes a lot of frustration of people who are used to being like AXX. Oh wait, no, I have to cancel. They don't cancel in those games; they go all the way through. Um, and the same could be said for Sekiro. And playing through it now, I'm just like you said, it'd be like "Duh, duh, 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 duh." And if I've played it so many times, I've gone through several new games. I haven't gotten the ending you got humorously. Um,
Oh, really?
yeah, but it's just like click, 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 click. Like it's just very
Mhm.
mechanical, and you feel the thing about the game is that you feel that accomplishment like when you're playing the combat like a new game plus. You're just like, holy shit, like I'm really good at this. I'm good at this game now. Like I
Oh
it's
yeah, it's its
it,
own it's its own skill. The game is its own, yeah,
yeah, and it's
life skill.
rewarding. Like it feels like rewarding, especially like when you have like the you know fourth and one kind of setups that will happen sometimes where you're just out of healing things and you're down to your last bit of health, and so are the other enemies. And 99% of the time it goes to the enemy because they usually will just do something. But uh there's like you jump. It's the kind of game you like jump in victory
Yeah,
to, which happens less and less, I feel.
yeah, I definitely agree. That the final, when you have to fight uh Ishin, was Ishin his
Yeah,
name?
Ishin.
Um in the
Well,
final boss. I
technically, it
mean,
wasn't Ishin, really.
well, yeah, some
The
whatever the
Sword Saint.
manifestation of, yeah.
Ishin the Sword Saint.
That is one of those where it's basically, now that we just hopefully eloquently described how Sekiro sort of mixes and matches all these different things. When you get to the final boss fight, basically they're like, cool. Hopefully you're good enough at literally everything because it's a full-on kitchen sink. Like
Yeah,
everything you've encountered in the game, you do have to sort of like pick a tactic. I feel like there was only two or three maybe good combinations of movesets, and skills and weapons that were very effective, across the three different phases of the final boss. But yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where you get into that fight, and the first couple of times you're getting, the opportunity to learn the moveset, you're like, okay, he's got lightning. I know how to deal with that. Oh, he moves quick with the swift dash. I know how to deal with that. Oh, that's blockable. I need to get out of the way of this. Oh, I need to get distance. Like you've got all these skills, and you start feeling like, I totally got this. I
yeah,
totally got this, and you feel absolutely like superhuman, at least through the first phase. And then, oh my god, it took me multiple evenings to
yeah.
even get through the second phase of that fight to the third phase,
Oh, that
because it's
is
just
one you. No, you know what it was? The one that took you like one try was the owl. Was the father
right.
the
It took me two tries or two or three
right?
tries. Yeah,
Which was like took me like so many tries, but like it's the end of that's essentially chapter two. But yes, he did suffer through Sword Saint Ishan like the rest of us, which was like a two
I
or
did.
three nighter. It's a brutal thing, and like one of the most hilarious parts out of it is out of nowhere he gets this very modern gun that he just shoots at you, which is a very like from software like it just doesn't make any sense.
Which does remind me. I think the boss, I feel like in hindsight, I had the most unreasonable difficulty with was the first time you encounter. I think the boss name was Snake Eyes or Snake Eater or something like that.
mhm.
It's the first, boss you encounter that has a gun, um,
Oh
and
yeah,
I just felt like I had no. I just
a
could not
cannon.
figure
It's
out
a
how to
cannon.
deal.
It's
Yeah,
not a gun. It's a
I
cannon.
couldn't figure out how to deal with it. Like
Yeah.
distance didn't help at first. Um, Perfectly timed dodging would, but then you couldn't like you couldn't close the gap because you were too far away. Like learning that boss was very difficult
Yeah.
for me.
That
Um,
I want to go back to the boss you said you had the most trouble with, which was the fire demon.
oh god, that
The fire
boss
demon's an
was insane.
optional late game bonus boss essentially. And I actually think it's designed really poorly. Um and the reason I do is because I think that boss more than any other boss in the game doesn't rely on everything you've learned. Like you get to that point and like blocking all that stuff, like it just doesn't really matter. It's really mostly about survival and
You must have to run
aggression.
away. Yeah,
Yeah.
you must have to run away
And
and
then
like
make sure
try to
you have a
survive.
fire shield. Like that's
Yep, you have
essentially
to have
it.
one. Yeah.
And and like there are very few other ways to beat that boss. And I every once in a while there's a clunker. It's a cool looking boss and it's cool fighting him because of his story, but um I the fact that it took you that long and that you did it was impressive. You can cheese him though. You can you can get him to jump off the edge, which is really fun to do.
The edge. It's
Yeah,
you're in like a castle, aren't you?
you can actually
Oh,
like
I know where. Yeah, I
you
know
can
where you're
actually like
talking.
walk up to the edge and he'll commit
There,
suicide.
there's
So
a
that's
tiny
fun.
edge. Yeah,
Yeah,
on one side. That's right.
yeah.
Huh.
Um,
Interesting.
which based on his life, suicide feels like a natural progression from Fire Demon. Um,
Well, one of my anecdotally one of my favorite like pastimes that I'll always remember now. You mentioned your brother Andrew and how the two of you were deep into this game and really love it. One of my favorite things was every time I didn't want to, just like every other game, I didn't want to Google and try and look things up. I wanted to try and learn and deal with as much as I could on my own.
yeah.
But, I don't consider asking friends for tips to be cheating or looking things up. And so, I would do my best. But once I got to like time 15 or try 20,
Hmm.
um, I would text you and your brother and be like, hey, what do I do with this boss? Like, give me just a hint. And I loved that literally every time I would text, your brother would just respond with, "Have you tried blocking?" It was his response to every first question was like, "Try parrying,"
Yeah.
uh, and I'd be like, "Oh, I can't. It's just this unblockable stuff." And he'd write back, "I don't know, man. Try parrying." And then, of course, that would all because that's usually always the solution in Sekiro is figure out how to parry that
It is
boss.
true, and it's obscured. That's what makes it
Yes.
really interesting. Is like a lot of the boss attacks, you can tell right away that they're parryable because there's like a sword swinging at you. But then, like, what online helps with is you just look at like this crazy big boss that you're like, no way, and it turns out like you can parry it in 3 different places,
Mhm.
uh, and the parry mechanism uh, is really well thought out in this game because there's like 2 combat bars, which didn't really talk about this. But the reason you want to parry a lot is because it builds out their gosh, what's it called? I forget it.
It's not focus. It's I don't know. You talk. I'll look it up.
Well, there's a normal. You can kill a boss by draining its HP normally, but some bosses are just designed where there is they have so much HP that there's no way. Uh,
Posture.
yeah, there's no way you're going to be able to kill them and them move as fast and fighting back as they will. So there's the second mechanism which involves perfect blocking and like doing counterattacks. The counterattacks, which are some of my favorite, they're the most satisfying counterattacks in
Especially the
gaming.
spear one. Oh my god,
The
that spear
spear one,
counter,
the
the
Makuri
Makiri
counter.
counter. Oh my
Yes,
god, it's the best.
it's so like the moves are so satisfying to pull off, and typically that's the way you want to beat the bosses. Typically, is not worry about their health bar because once they break their posture, they'll take the same sort of killing blow that they would if you killed their HP. And some bosses are a combination of both, but man,
Yeah, like a perfect example. I can't remember the boss's name, but who you might. It's the like the spirit that wears the robe and carries a huge like scythe and spins
the
around and like
monk.
jumps at you. The
Uh,
monk.
yeah,
Oh my god! So the first time you encounter this monk, it's first of all it's gigantic. It's gigantic person looking thing,
yeah,
but it move like it floats because it's ethereal and it makes funny noises. It's always
yeah.
like just like tripping you out,
The
and it
corrupted monk.
moves. Yeah, it moves in weird patterns because it floats and then it can jump fast. And it was the first boss I encountered where Sekiro kind of throws this overwhelming aspect of the attacks to you, where it's sort of like lures you in with a false sense of like here's a blow, here's a blow, and then the whirlwind attack just comes at you with like 5 attacks, and you'll if you don't get out of the way or block those, you will die
Yeah,
instantly. And I was trying to counter, but it was such a brutal and like scary fast attack that it scares you, and like you don't react the way that you would normally do it. And that was an example of one of the bosses where I texted your brother and he responded with just parry all the attacks. And I was like, dude, it's not like I can't parry all those attacks. And sure enough, the very first time I was able to do that, it's like you actually now like in hindsight, when you encounter that boss the next time, you don't even give a shit about those first moves. You're just like, yeah, those are your dumb moves. Just dodge out of the way, not even waste your blocking on it because
yeah,
their posture will refill. You actually wait for the scary attack that used to scare the shit out of you. And when that whirlwind attack comes, you just perfect parry 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like time it perfectly right, break all their posture, kill the boss. And you're like, wow, I am insanely superhuman and skilled at this game. And all I had to do, just like your brother said, was block.
yeah. Especially when you encounter a giraffe in this game. Still one of my favorite boss names in all this history. If you ever get, we're coming on time, but
Yeah.
if you're listening this far in, Google giraffe Sekiro and see what the giraffe is. It's also a really fun fight. You should watch a YouTube video of it.
And it's not
Um,
actually a giraffe.
Very good, Matt. You took out any sort of subtext like a
And when you're done
true
with that,
professional.
you should Google Mercury counter.
Oh, so satisfying.
It's
I
the
don't
best.
think googling it is
Probably
as
not, because you
has
got to
it,
feel it. Like, you have to feel the press of that button and
and
what
the
happens.
vibration. It's
So
just
good.
perfect. It's just one of the best controls in video games. Well, Matt, what would you say uh, about people who haven't picked up Sekiro? What would you tell them?
Uh, I mean, I would certainly say if you are a fan of other action games and combat games, and you've always wanted to get into a From game, maybe you've even tried a couple of them like I have, and then, Sekiro came along and you're like, nope, I don't like those games. I'm not going to play, just like me. I bet you're a perfect candidate for trying this game and pushing through the early game to see if you'll enjoy it. I Like I said, I don't quite know if I loved it, but it was very close to loving it, and certainly feel like by the end, I developed a very deep and solid skill that I cannot use for anything other than this game. But the depth of skill I have is palpable and measurable. Um, and I can't say that about many other games that I've played. So certainly it's rewarding and super fun. Like the world is great too. So like you will get if you put in the effort, you won't just get rewarded with the skill. Like the game itself is we didn't even really talk about any of that, but like the game itself, the characters, the world, the fidelity, the graphics, the art direction, it's all amazing. So it's worth putting in the effort for sure.
I love that game. That was my game of the year. I wonder what game, if you would go back and revise your game of the year for that year.
What year did it come out?
I think it was 2019, maybe 2018.
Hmm. I don't know what would have been my game of the year for that year.
I don't know. 2019.
Yeah, 2019 it came out. Um,
Okay, Control, Death Stranding. You really love Death Stranding. Outer Wilds was probably up there for you.
uh,
I know you really loved Fire Emblem Three Houses. That was right up your alley.
okay, hold on. I know what game we picked for um, 2019 because of when we played it. It was Hades.
Was Hades 2019?
Yeah, because it came out at the end of
No, Hades
2018.
was 2020.
I don't know, man.
Yeah, Hades was officially released on December in 2020.
Oh, I see. It was released to Nintendo Switch in 2020, but
Uh,
it's like the beta release was 2018, and I think it came out in the summer of 2019.
that's not true. It was 2 years. It took a while for them to get there. I know because I would have definitely picked Hades for that year.
Yeah,
Like I love Sekiro, but Hades is a masterpiece. All right. Well, we need to finish up because we've already gone too long. Even though we're back, I know it's nice to hear the sweet dulcimer tones of our voices.
I mean,
But
hopefully it was.
yeah, or not, who knows? But you're still here, so obviously. Um, and so for this episode of the Chips and Bits podcast, I have been Kenny Myers, and with me always in spirit, if not in Seattle anymore.
It's me, Matthew Anderson.
Thank you so much for listening while we took a break. We have a ton of games that we've played that we are going to get through. So you're going to see a lot of cool titles pop up. Hopefully ones that we liked, maybe some we hated, and maybe
As we
some
power through to episode 100.
yes, Matt's favorite number. I mean, it's favorite thing to do. Anyway, uh, that's it. Let's do the theme song thing again. The theme song thing. Here's your theme song.